これより次のセッションを始めます。
Now we'll
次が最後のテーマで
begin the
セッション
final
になりま
session.
す。4つ目のテーマは
The fourth
東ア
theme
ジアの核
is
軍縮を
promoting
促進する
nuclear
ためにです。
disarmament in East Asia.
東アジア地域では
In the
核
East
軍縮
Asian
を愚か、
region,
その
there
た
is
めの
no
対話すら
dialogue,
おぼつか
let
ない状
alone
態です。
nuclear disarmament.
北朝鮮の核ミサイル開
North
発や
Korea's
中国
development
の
of
急速な
nuclear
核軍
missiles,
拡、
China's
アメリカ
rapid
とその同
nuclear
盟
arms
国による
buildup,
核抑止
and
の
the
強化などが
strengthening
進ん
of
でいます。
nuclear deterrence by the United
他方、
States and
東
its
南アジアの国々
allies
で
are
は
progressing.
米中対立に
On
と
the
らわ
other
れない
hand,
外
there
交
are
を模索
moves in
し、
Southeast
核兵
Asian
器自体を
countries
形
to
成
seek
し、 核兵器
diplomacy
禁止
that
条
is
約に参
not
加
caught
する
up
など
in
の
the
動きがありま
US-China
す。
conflict to form
どうす
nuclear
れば
weapon
地域で
free
の対立を
zones.
超え、東ア
How
ジア
can we
で核軍
overcome
縮を進め
regional
ることができ
conflicts
るの
and
か、
promote nuclear
地域の多
disarmament
様
in
な視点
East
を踏まえ
Asia?
て議論しま
We will
す。
discuss this based on the diverse
登
perspectives
壇
of the
者は
region.
軍備管理協
The
会所長
speakers will
ダリル・
be
キンボール
Mr.
さん、
Daryl
汎
KIMBALL,
用連
Director
隊
of the
平和軍
Arms
縮セン
Control
ターチーム
Association,
長イ・
Ms.
ヨンアさん、
Lee
ガジャマタ
Youngah,
大学国
Team
際
Leader
関係
Peace
学科上
and
級講師
Disarmament
ムハディ・スギ
Center
オノさん、
People's Solidarity for
韓国国会議
Participatory
員イ・
Democracy,
ジェジョンさん、
Mr.
長崎
Muhadi
大学
SUGIONO,
核兵器廃棄
Senior
研究センタ
Lecturer,
ーレクナ
Department
教
of
授鈴木
International
達次郎さん、
Relations,
オンライン
Gadjah
参加で
Mada
アジア太平洋リ
University,
ーダーシップネットワー
Mr.
ク
Lee
APLN
Jaejung,
副会長
member
ム
of
ン
the
ジェインさん
National
です。
Assembly of the
よろしくお
Republic
願
of
いしま
Korea,
す。
Mr. Tatsujiro Suzuki, Professor and Research Center for the Nuclear Weapons
はい、
Abolition,
皆さん、こんにちは。
and Mr.
こ
Wu
のセッショ
Jaejung,
ン
Vice
のモ
President.
デレーターをやらせていただきます、長崎大学核兵器廃絶研究センター、レクナの鈴木と申します。よろしくお願いしま
I'm
す。
Suzuki from the Mukna Center,
今、ご紹介がありましたように、このセッシ
and
ョンは、
I was
東ア
introduced.
ジアの緊張する環境の
This is
中で、
about
どうやっ
the
て核軍縮を進めていくかということでです
relationships
ね、
between the East
5
Asian
名
countries.
の
And we have
パネリスト
5
の方に集まって
panelists
い
with
ただい
us
たんです
today,
が、時間がですね、100分ということで、
and we have
かなり
100
厳
minutes,
しい時間割になっておりますので、
so you probably won't
早
have enough
速
time.
話を、議
So
論を進めていきたいと思うんですが、
let
今日
us
ですね、
begin.
進め方なんですけども、
So our
ま
progression
ずです
today.
ね、キーノートスピーチというか、ちょっと
So as a
長めの
keynote
スピーチをですね、
speech,
お二人にお願いしています。
we'll have
オ
two
ンラインで
speakers
ご参加のムンジャイン
online.
先生いらっ
We
しゃいますか？
have Moon Join with us today, right?
聞こえますか？
Can you hear
Can you
us?
hear us? Okay, thank you very much. Can you speak a little bit?
Yes,
Oh,
I'm
good.
here.
Thank you very much. ムンジャイン先生と、
And Moon
こちらに
Join.
今左に私の隣にい
And
らっしゃるダ
here
リル・キンボールさんに
next
です
to me,
ね、
we have
最初のスピ
Daryl
ーチを
Kimball
15分
and
ずつしていただきます。最初に
15
キン
minutes
ボールさんの方
each,
からしていただき
15 minutes
まして、
each, we will have
そ
a
の後です
speech.
ね、
And
お
after
二
that,
人、
we have the two
3人いらっしゃいますね。
or
狭いけど大
three.
丈夫ですか？
Are you okay? Is it
Too
crowded over
crowded.
there?
No, it's okay. Don't
Everything
fight.
okay?
Okay. 3人の方々にですね、
And the
コ
three
メ
of
ントをい
them
ただ
over
いて、
there, we'll have
それ
some
からフリーディ
comments,
スカッションというこ
and
と
then
にな
we'll
りたいと
enter
思いま
the
す。
free discussion.
これからですね、申し訳ない。今
And
日
from
の
now
パネ
on,
リストですね、皆さん、
the panelists
日本
today,
語がおできなきない、日本語で
not
ない
all
っていうことなのでですね、
they're
ここから
not
私
Japanese
もですね、
speakers.
英語
So
で
from here,
モデレートさせてい
I
た
would
だ
like
きた
to
いと思います。
moderate in
それでは
English.
let's start the discussion in English, okay? Like the first speaker, I would like to introduce Dr. Kimball, please.
It's an honor to be here in Tokyo. I appreciate the invitation from our esteemed hosts for putting together this very important gathering in this, the 80th anniversary year of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And on behalf of the Arms Control Association, I wanted to start out by congratulating our friends at Nihon Hidankyo for well-deserved recipients of the 2024 Nobel Peace Prize, and to thank all of the Habakasha for sharing their stories and for reminding the world why we must pursue and achieve a world without nuclear weapons. Over the decades, civil society organizations around the globe have successfully pushed governments to take steps to reduce the nuclear danger, to agree to cut the number of nuclear weapons, to halt and then ban nuclear weapons testing, and to curb the spread of nuclear weapons, and to conclude the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. But as we approach the 80th anniversary of the bombings, the nuclear risks around the world are growing once again. Human civilization remains precariously tethered to the existence of nuclear weapons and the threat they might be used again in South Asia, in Europe, between the United States and Russia, or here in East Asia, between the United States and China, or on the Korean Peninsula. You can move to the next slide, please. Dangerous nuclear deterrence relationships exist between and among the world's 9 nuclear armed states. As we heard from Ambassador Clement, it is possible, perhaps it's likely, that the dangerous nuclear balance of terror will fail someday. If there is a conflict between the United States and China over Taiwan, it is currently U.S. policy to use nuclear weapons first, which would likely lead to a massive U.S.-Chinese nuclear exchange. It is also not clear whether in such a conflict, China would respect its no first use policy. If NATO and Russian forces engage directly, or if Russia were to use nuclear weapons in the conflict in Ukraine, that too could lead to an all-out nuclear war and kill or injure hundreds of millions of people in the first hours or days. Next slide, please. Making matters worse, progress on nuclear disarmament is stalled, and there is an unconstrained three-way nuclear arms race on the horizon. A special UN security meeting on nuclear disarmament issues that was convened by Japan last year underscored the fact that agreement among the 15 members of the Security Council that the risk of nuclear war and arms racing is higher than at any point since the end of the Cold War. But the meeting also highlighted the chronic differences among the nuclear armed states about how to reduce the nuclear danger. None of the 5 nuclear armed states who are members of the Non-Proliferation Treaty have engaged in constructive nuclear disarmament and risk reduction diplomacy for more than a decade. Instead, they're spending tens of billions of dollars annually to modernize, upgrade, and in the case of China, expand the number of nuclear weapons. As the Japanese foreign minister warned at that UN Security Council meeting, quote, "The world now stands on the cusp of reversing decades of declines in nuclear stockpiles." Next slide, please. So in my remarks here, I'm going to propose that there are 3 major steps that civil society can take to promote nuclear disarmament in East Asia and globally. First, it's important to push harder on governments to head off an unconstrained nuclear buildup and to press for bilateral US and Russian and US-Chinese nuclear disarmament diplomacy. Second, we must urge leading nuclear armed and non-nuclear armed states to create new fora to engage in a sustained multilateral dialogue on nuclear disarmament. And third, as we're doing here with this conference in the civil society sector, we must also encourage leading governments, particularly Japan, to promote greater leadership to highlight the devastating humanitarian consequences of nuclear war. So on the first issue, let me go into some depth. If you could go to the next slide, please. To begin, to foster diplomacy to head off a three-way arms race, we need action between the United States and Moscow. For decades, these two governments negotiated arms control and arms reduction agreements that have constrained and verifiably reduced the massive nuclear forces they had. But deteriorating relations and the Russian war in Ukraine have stymied progress. And 1 year from now, on February 5, 2026, the last remaining treaty between the two countries, the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, will expire. In response, some congressional Republicans and some of President Trump's advisors want Washington to spend even more than the $756 billion 10-year plan for modernizing the U.S. nuclear arsenal in order to increase the number and diversity of U.S. nuclear weapons. Without some form of mutual restraint between the U.S. and Russia, the United States and Russia could double the number of nuclear warheads they currently deploy, from about 1,550 to more than 3,000 by uploading additional warheads on their land and sea-based missiles. Such a buildup would reverse 35 years of U.S.-Russian reductions. More nuclear weapons would not enhance deterrence and are not necessary to deter nuclear attack. It would divert resources from other human needs, and it would prompt China and Russia to match any U.S. increase. Now, just a few days ago, President Trump, while addressing the World Economic Forum in Davos, said that he wants to hold talks with Russia and China about reducing nuclear weapons stockpiles. That's very good, and it might be possible, but a new comprehensive framework agreement will be difficult and would take months, if not years, to achieve. Furthermore, hopeful statements from a U.S. president do not alone constitute an effective nuclear arms control strategy. And Trump's recent proposal to expand U.S. research and development on a wide array of missile defense technologies, including space-based missile defenses, will only encourage Russia and China to build up their offensive nuclear forces to ensure they can deter a potential U.S. nuclear attack. So in order to succeed on denuclearization, President Trump needs a practical and effective approach. It'll have to be more realistic than the plan that he pursued in 2020 for engaging China and Russia in trilateral talks. So we propose that the United States and Russia begin by discussions on a simple, informal deal, simply to maintain the existing caps on their existing strategic nuclear arsenals, the long-range nuclear arsenals, as long as the other side agrees to do so. This is something that Trump and Putin could agree to do when they begin talks about the future of the war in Ukraine. Now, leading states, including Japan, have an important role to play in this process by encouraging Washington and Moscow to conclude a simple bilateral understanding along these lines. Next slide, please. So this agreement could remain in force until they can conclude a more comprehensive and durable framework to reduce all types of their nuclear weapons. And as long as the United States and Russia agree to cap their deployed nuclear weapons and work to negotiate a new nuclear arms control framework, Washington, London, Tokyo, and others should call upon China to refrain from building up its force. And France and the United Kingdom should also freeze the overall size of their nuclear weapons and work to fulfill their obligation to pursue negotiations on nuclear disarmament. This must be a very high priority at the upcoming Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference this spring. They need to make this a top-line message at the conference. In addition, to promote disarmament globally and in East Asia, the United States and China need to resume a bilateral nuclear dialogue on issues of mutual concern. There's been limited success in discussions between the U.S. and China. China is now estimated to possess some 600 nuclear weapons, including more than 300 on long-range systems, and the numbers are growing. It is estimated that China could build up its force to 1,000 total nuclear warheads by the year 2030. Apparently in response to concerns about growing U.S. conventional and nuclear capabilities. Such a buildup began around 2018, and both the Trump and Biden administrations sought to engage China in arms control, but with limited success. So next slide, please. Not quite that one. Go back to the next one. I'm sorry. Okay. To promote a more substantive dialogue with China, the White House should agree to seriously discuss China's proposal for a no first use agreement as a first step towards a broader understanding about their respective nuclear postures and on strategic stability. Trump should assure President Xi that the United States does not plan to threaten nuclear coercion against China, and Xi should extend the same assurance to the United States. Such a shift could reduce tensions and lead to more concrete measures designed to prevent a Chinese and Russian, or Chinese and U.S. arms race. So next slide, please. Another challenge is for the 5 nuclear armed states to pursue their nuclear disarmament obligations, all 5. Ultimately, this means that other nuclear armed states need to be drawn into the disarmament process, or else the DPRK, India, Israel, and Pakistan will continue to build up their nuclear capabilities. Unfortunately, the current nuclear disarmament architecture has proven inadequate to facilitate progress. To overcome this problem, the Arms Control Association has proposed that a group of leading states, possibly including Japan, work together to launch a new high-level series of disarmament summits to inject momentum into global efforts to eliminate nuclear weapons. Modeled after the successful nuclear security summits, these high-level disarmament summits could involve a group of 20 to 30 leaders from nuclear-armed and non-nuclear states. If designed properly, such an approach could help overcome existing obstacles, increase pressure for action, and complement existing fora designed to advance progress on the elimination of nuclear weapons. It would put a global spotlight on the issue, put pressure on leaders to deliver on promises and commitments, and could get around some of the obstacles that now block progress at other fora like the Conference on Disarmament. And third, let me go to the next slide, please. We need to continue to increase global awareness of the risks and consequences of nuclear war. For decades, the Hibakusha have provided the world with a powerful reminder of the devastating humanitarian impacts of nuclear weapons use, development, production, and testing, and the ongoing risks of nuclear war. At the 2023 G7 summit in Hiroshima, former President Kishida wisely observed that conveying the reality of nuclear attack is important as a starting point for all nuclear disarmament efforts. It's imperative that all global leaders have a deeper appreciation and understanding for the impacts of nuclear weapons production, testing, and use. And this is all the more important as the number of first-generation Hibakusha with direct memories of the attacks continue to dwindle. So we need to look forward to new and more creative ways to sustain this awareness. And so we would propose that Japan, as the only nation that's experienced the unspeakable horrors of a nuclear weapons attack, is uniquely positioned to take the lead for a high-level international conference on the impacts of nuclear weapons. Now, this conference, organized by Japan's most important non-governmental organizations, is an important step in this direction that the Japanese government might build upon in order to engage more government leaders at the highest levels from around the world. A 2 or 3 day head of state level conference on the health and environmental impacts of nuclear weapons in war would be consistent with Japan's history of leadership in building global arms control and disarmament. It should not only recall the devastation of the bombings from 1945, but underscore the effects of more than 2,000 nuclear test explosions, the toxic legacy of nuclear weapons production activities, and the consequences of a global nuclear war today. This conference could help encourage and focus attention on the need for leaders in Washington, Moscow, and Beijing to engage in direct talks on disarmament. It's also a way to push our leaders and our fellow citizens to reconsider the risks and the immorality of nuclear deterrence strategies that we heard so eloquently described by Ambassador Komet in the previous session, and a way to begin the conversation to move away from dangerous and unsustainable reliance on threatening the use of nuclear weapons. So let me stop there, and let me finish by just saying that to stimulate action on nuclear disarmament in East Asia and around the world, it will require new and bolder global leadership, not just from Washington, not just from Moscow, but from all governments around the world and from civil society to build pressure in the weeks and months ahead to make progress once again to a world without nuclear weapons. Thank you.
Thank you, Daryl. This is a very comprehensive, but yet very specific proposal for bilateral US-Russia, US-China, and the multilateral, and eventually, thank you very much for a proposal for Japan to take initiative to host the conference on the consequences of nuclear weapon use. This is a very interesting proposal. I think Japan cannot refuse. Thank you very much. All right, Professor Moon.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, could you give us your speech for 15 minutes? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your invitation. And also, I would like to send my heartfelt congratulations to Hidakyo for winning Nobel Peace Laureate. And Daryl has given us a big picture, and I'll give a very specific focus on the Korean Peninsula. And now we are talking about North Korean nuclear threat, and it is getting from bad to worse. And what is the nature of North Korean nuclear threat? How South Korea has been responding it? How that kind of dynamics have created new implications for peace and stability in Northeast Asia. And finally, I'll give us some ideas and what actions to be taken with regard to civil society. First issue of what? Is North Korean nuclear threat is real or contrived? And particularly recently, studying with Pete Hegseth, the new defense secretary, and later President Donald Trump made it very clear that North Korea is a nuclear power. And that really alarmed South Korea and Japan. We still believe that North Korea is not nuclear. We cannot recognize North Korea as a nuclear weapon state. And we have hope of pursuing complete, verifiable and irreversible dismantling of nuclear weapons in North Korea. But anyhow, the Trump administration seems to taking North Korea nuclear weapon status, for granted. And then let us make a quick, check, really to check of North Korean nuclear weapons capability. First, North Korea has nuclear facilities. It has, reprocessing, facilities for PU plutonium. It has a highly enriched uranium, production facilities. It has a tritium, laboratories and whatever. Therefore, North Korea has facilities, and North Korea is known to have nuclear materials too, about 50 to 70 kilograms of plutonium and about 1,200 kilograms enriched uranium, and etc. It has nuclear materials too. And nuclear weapons now, according to most recent report by SIPRI, as well as the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, say that the North Korea has about 50 nuclear weapons minimum, maximum 70 to 80 nuclear warheads. Some other organization even come up with 100 nuclear warhead. North Korea has a nuclear weapons. And North Korea has a variety of delivery vehicles. Okay. And plus North Korea has undertaken nuclear testing, the seventh. And now we are waiting whether North Korea will take a seventh nuclear test or not. Okay. And also North Korea has claimed that it has miniaturized nuclear weapons, and it has made the nuclear bombs much more lighter, and it has a multiple type of nuclear weapons, from hydrogen bomb, boosted atomic bombs, and atomic bombs. Therefore, given all these kinds of basic attributes, North Korea can be said as a nuclear weapon state. Okay, but there's another important changes in North Korea. There is a doctrinal changes. North Korea has been arguing that our nuclear weapons is solely for defensive purposes. And North Korea has been claiming that we go for no first use in a principle. But North Korea changed since 2 years ago. Okay, he has abandoned, North Korea has abandoned the no first use doctrine. And more than that, and Kim Jong-un described its nuclear weapons mission as a second mission. That means what? No nuclear weapons can be used for preemptively for the purpose of protecting sovereignty, regime security, and territory of North Korea. And another related development is this: North Korea has declared that now it has technical nuclear weapons. It has created 8 the units, companies to exclusively deal with these tactical nuclear weapons. And North Korea even claimed that they have deployed those 8 units along the front lines. Then you can clearly see North Korea has fundamentally changed. And nuclear weapons is not solely for the defensive purposes; it is for offensive purposes. Okay, and that made South Korea very, very worrisome. Then what is the South Korean responses? Still, the majority strategists in South Korea argue that, along with American pundits, that ROK U.S. conventional deterrence capability is quite sufficient to deter North Korea from using nuclear weapons, of course, combined with American nuclear umbrella. But that argument has been fading away. That traditional posture has been under attack. Therefore, a growing number of South Korean politicians and conservative citizen groups have been arguing that we need more guarantee from the United States. Okay, because they argue that American nuclear umbrella is a torn umbrella, broken umbrella. Okay, we cannot trust the United States. Therefore, they have been arguing, calling for the retransfer of American tactical nuclear weapons to South Korea. But of course, the American government flatly rejected that idea. And then when the United States rejected our idea of asking for the retransfer of tactical nuclear weapons, which was withdrawn in 1991, and then we have been pushing for the idea of a NATO type of nuclear sharing. Of course, the United States turned it down. However, United States come up with alternative arrangement that is called the creation of nuclear consultative group, okay? And so that ROK in the United States can engage in joint planning, in intelligence sharing, even under the table, on table, the exercise and whatever. And the Yoon Suk-yeol government was very happy about American arrangement, which was indicated in the Washington Declaration. Therefore, we thought that that kind of arrangement would placate in South Korean dissenting voices, but that was not the case. There's on the contrary, there's increasing voices of pro-nuke, stance in South Korea. And they argued that even hold this idea of extended deterrence. How can you trust extended deterrence? We should have our own nuclear weapons, okay? That is a growing voice. Almost 70% of South Korean citizens support the idea of pursuing independent nuclear weapons acquisition in South Korea. But of course, if you analyze South Korean voice in favor of the nuclear, there are two types. One is what I call the teleological school. Those who believe that South Korea should have nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons is our nuclear sovereignty. And also in dealing with North Korean nukes, nuke is the only answer. Nuke for nuke. Therefore, those people argue that it is our mandate to have our own nuclear weapons. Who cares, international society? That is one view. Another view is what I call an instrumentalist view. That is what? Okay, in order to assure American commitment to the nuclear protection of South Korea, we can play this nuclear weapons card. And also by pushing for the idea of independent nuclear weapons, we can put the pressure on China so that China can persuade North Korea to give up nuclear weapons. Therefore, is hold this idea of independent nuclear weapons in acquisition is being seen as a kind of bargaining leverage vis-a-vis the U.S. and China, as well as North Korea too. Okay, that is that we have such a kind of two contending views. Okay, but increasingly there is a growing number of those who favor teleological view of having nuclear weapons in the name of nuclear sovereignty. That is a very worrisome development. Okay, and finally, a lot of people realize that we cannot have nuclear weapons. American protection of American, opposition will be quite formidable, and also we are a member of NPT. We cannot get away from NPT, even if we try to resort to Article 10 of NPT. Therefore, by realizing that kinds of external constraint, okay, and some conservative folks now argue for nuclear latency, which was quite, popular since 1964, after China undertook nuclear testing in October 1964. Japanese scholars were suggesting the idea of nuclear latency. And now nuclear latency has been very popular in South Korea. There is now, therefore, we have a variety of ways of dealing with the North Korean threat. But the current debate in South Korea has some very negative implications, for peace and stability in Northeast Asia. The first is what? The North Korean behavior has lowered the nuclear threshold. And I think that should have been influenced by the Russian behavior in Ukraine. Okay, hold this idea that we can use tactical nuclear weapons in the case of conventional warfare. Okay, that has become very worrisome issue. And another issue is hold the idea of, since the United States blocked President Park Chung-in's attempt to have nuclear weapons in 1970s. Okay, there has been kinds of unshakable nuclear taboo in South Korea. Very few scholars and journalists talked about nuclear weapons and whatever. But now the nuclear taboo is being eroded very rapidly. Now we have open forums to promote the idea of nuclear sovereignty, nuclear weapons, and particularly hardline, retired military, veterans and some scholars. They formed several forums, and now they are promoting nuclear sovereignty and independent acquisition of nuclear weapons. That is very worrisome. Therefore, this erosion of nuclear taboo in South Korea has become another very dangerous, offshoot of North Korean nuclear fiasco. Third one is the United States has been sending very wrong signals to South Korea. One good example is Eldridge Colby. He has been arguing that, okay, our primary goal is deterring China. Therefore, let us, Japan and South Korea, have nuclear weapons, okay? So then we can use nuclear weapons of Japan and South Korea in countering China's expansion. But that kinds of signal have really inspired South Korea's pro-nuke forces, okay? And therefore, it is very, very important for the United States to come up with, some kinds of, restraining behavior. Otherwise, those folks in South Korea can easily take advantage of American position in advancing their pro-nuke, position. And finally, if South Korea, for whatever reasons, if South Korea goes to nuclear, then it is very natural for Japan to go for nuclear, and Taiwan will jump on that one. Therefore, nuclear domino syndrome cannot be avoided. Then now we have N3, okay, the US, China, Russia, and plus North Korea, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, they all have nuclear weapons in this small theater. What would be implication? It will be catastrophic. Therefore, we should avoid in every possible way. Then finally, I'm sorry I'm going too much, but finally, let me give some of my observations. I think the most important suggestion for the civil society is this. Civil society should put the pressure on Japanese government, South Korean government, American government, Chinese government that they should be resumption of dialogue between North Koreans concerned party. They should effort to reduce tension on the Korean Peninsula. There should be preventive diplomacy to reduce tension, build competence, and activate the whole dialogue and negotiations. That should be the most important step. And another important step is, I'm really worrisome about all this lowering of nuclear threshold resurfacing on the Korean Peninsula. Therefore, it is very important for us to, particularly civil society should take initiative to restore and preserve nuclear taboo and enhance education about the importance about, all this TPNW, because in Korea, very few talked about TPNW, okay? Because our government has opposed the TPNW, but their kind of educational effort should be there. And also, there got to be, the civil society put, as Daryl pointed out, the civil society should put very hard pressures on the nuclear arms control talks in Northeast Asia. There are virtually none, okay? And ensuring strategic stability and reducing nuclear arsenal will be very, very important. Therefore, we should put the pressures on the government. And finally, I really wanted to, emphasize the importance of some sort of, Northeast Asian Security Summit, which can deal with not only conventional but also, nuclear issues too. And within that context, we can push for the idea of nuclear weapons free zone in Northeast Asia. The Nagasaki group has been pushing for that idea. And I think it is time for us to raise that issue so that nuclear weapons free zone in Northeast Asia could become another very important agenda for discussion, not only among the government, but also non-governmental actors. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Moon. Detailed analysis of the current Korean Peninsula situation, which is very glooming and become very pessimistic. But at the end, thank you very much for very positive recommendations for civil society also including a nuclear free zone idea, which I myself is also committed to propose. And so thank you very much again. All right. So from now, we have shorter comments. Sorry, but 5 minutes each. I think we should go to Korean ladies first and then Indonesian. Which one comes first? Youngah? Okay.
Thank you for organizing this conference and inviting me as a discussant. I'm honored to be here with you all guys to discuss nuclear disarmament in East Asia and nuclear-free Northeast Asia. As you already know well, the world has entered a new era of a nuclear arms race. The United States, which currently has 3,700 nuclear warheads in stockpile, is pursuing nuclear weapons modernization program worth a total of 1.5 trillion. China is said to be increasing its nuclear arsenal to 1,500 warheads by 2035. Russia is also strengthening its nuclear forces. They mentioned the possibility of using tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine. And in November last year, they announced a new nuclear doctrine that is the requirements for the use of nuclear weapons. And the Korean Peninsula is a region where the threat of nuclear war is ever present. The war dialogue and negotiations have completely stopped. The DPRK nuclear and missile capabilities have advanced. And ROK government has emphasized peace through strength and strengthening its extended deterrence. U.S. strategic assets are deployed on the Korean Peninsula from time to time, and joint military exercise between the ROK and U.S. and ROK U.S. Japan continue throughout the year. Korean Peninsula is currently a typical security dilemma. The more we focus on building up our deterrence, the greater the risk of attack or the possibility of accidental armed conflict. The level of threat is pushing its limits, and military exercise with the nuclear war in mind are being conducted competitively on Korean Peninsula. It is urgent to come up with a plan to prevent a nuclear war and resolve the crisis. However, the biggest problem right now is that all dialogue channels have been cut off, and the September 19 military agreements between two Koreas, which has served as a safety pin to prevent armed conflict in the border area, has been broken. There is no way to prevent accidental crosses under the current system. It has been revealed that those who read the coup, including Yoon Suk-yeol, who declared the martial law on December 3rd, tried to provoke the civil war to justify martial law. This is a dangerous and reckless act that puts the lives and safety of the people at risk. The inauguration of President Trump has raised the prospect of the DPRK-US dialogue. However, as many experts have already said, negotiation will not be easy. Some even criticize the talks, saying that there will be a small deal, like a nuclear disarmament negotiations, not aimed at denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. However, I think we can start with a nuclear freeze, then move on disarmament, and ultimately aim for denuclearization. In the process, the ROK government needs to lead the way to build the peace on the Korean Peninsula, including reducing military tensions and building trust, and concluding a peace treaty to end the Korean War. However, in the ROK, as the Professor Moon said, there are arguments for developing our own nuclear weapons after Trump has referred to DPRK as a nuclear power. Last month, ROK and US convened the fourth nuclear consultative group, which have been postponed due to the declaration of martial law. Although the details of the meeting were not disclosed, it is said that the two sides reaffirmed their commitments. The DPRK use of nuclear weapons would mean the end of its regime. President Yoon has emphasized the U.S. biased diplomacy and hostile policy toward the DPRK and peace through force. Inter-Korean relations have reached their worst point in Yoon's period. If Constitutional Court decided to impeach him, there is a possibility of a government change. There is also the possibility of a peace on the Korean Peninsula. The policy of forcing the DPRK to give up its nuclear development through sanctions and pressure have already failed. The solution of nuclear issues on the Korean Peninsula can only be achieved through trust building and improved relations. We need to create the conditions for resuming dialogue. South Korean civil society is calling for reducing or suspending the ROK-US joint military drills to create the environment for dialogue. Also, we should start the nuclear disarmament dialogue with the goal of establishing a nuclear-free zone in Northeast Asia as soon as possible. This includes the six-party talks countries. I believe that this dialogue can be the first step towards the whole free of nuclear weapons. Thank you for listening.
This is a very concise, very concrete, strong proposal. Thank you very much. And you said something about the Korean political situation, which is we have a perfect guest today, parliamentarian Jaejung. Please, thank you very much for joining us today. Could you give us your brief?
Yes, konnichiwa. First of all, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude for invitation to this meaningful event. I'm a lawmaker of RK. So this day, at any conference, a seminar, other gathering I attend, regarding the topic, the first question I always receive is about the declaration of Miyashiro. At the time, I was in my constituency when I round up the unbelievable news through a breaking report. I immediately rushed to National Assembly, only to find entrance blocked by police and martial law troops. Thanks to the support of citizens who had gathering after hearing the news, I managed to climb over the fence, like our speaker, and enter the main assembly chamber. We finally succeeded in lifting martial law through a vote. Yes, let's get back to the topic. Yeah, in August 2022, I had the opportunity to attend the Nagasaki atomic bomb victim memorial ceremony. Following this event, the South Korea delegation, together with Japanese lawmakers, launched the Participatory International Parliamentary Initiative to advance the establishment of the Northeast Asia nuclear weapon free zone. This initiative envisions South Korea, Japan, and North Korea forming completely denuclearized region, while nuclear armed state, the US, Russia, China, would provide the negative security assurance. The 3+3 initiative was founded on the conviction that such a international treaty could lay the groundwork for lasting peace in the Northeast Asia. Since then, over the past 2 years, the geopolitical landscape of Northeast Asia has changed dramatically. US-China tension has intensified, and North Korea nuclear capabilities has near completion. President Donald Trump went so far as to refer to North Korea as a nuclear power on his inauguration day. Many experts predict that the US will engage in nuclear freeze and arms reduction negotiation with North Korea rather than denuclearization talks. Against this backdrop, South Korea's conservative politician, as mentioned, Moon and Kim mentioned, are bring the argument for independent nuclear armament to public discourse. Worryingly, some public opinions seem to be shifting in their favor. In nuclear freeze and arm reduction negotiation become an established reality instead of denuclearization talks, South Korean will find it difficult to accept coexistence with a nuclear-armed North Korea. This sentiment will undoubtedly have an impact on Japan as well. That is why South Korea and Japan must join forces to confront this challenge together. Currently, President Yoon has only and exclusively focused on strengthening US, Japan, South Korea security cooperation. As a result, North Korea's alignment with Russia has more deepened, and inter-Korean relations have been completely collapsed. Consequently, the nuclear threat in Northeast Asia has grown ever more acute. Now is the time for a fundamental shift of strategy to achieve peace on the Korean Peninsula and complete denuclearization. Only through such a shift can a vision of Northeast Asia regional peace be realized. It is time to restart our Korean Peninsula peace process, version 2, season 2. Regrettably, during the Moon Jae-in administration, effort to achieve complete denuclearization and establish permanent peace on the Korean Peninsula did not receive sufficient support from Japan. This, coupled with various historical and political factors, led to a deterioration in South Korea-Japan relations. We must not allow history to repeat past mistakes. At present, inter-Korean relations have reached an unprecedented low. All communication channels have been closed, making it difficult to determine even where to begin. But there is always a path forward. In parallel with effort to resolve inter-Korean relations, we must also work much harder to strengthen both the South Korea, Japan, North Korea, Japan relations. The engagement of the Japanese government and civil society is indispensable to this endeavor. I urge all of you gathering today here to redouble your effort to peace on the Korean Peninsula. Only through such dedicated action can we achieve our nuclear-free Northeast Asia. This year marks the 60th anniversary of diplomatic normalization between South Korea and Japan. There are countless areas where our two nations must work together. The nuclearization and peace initiative for Northeast Asia is one of the most important ones. I firmly believe that our joint effort for peace will pave the way for a new era in South Korea-Japan relations. Yes, wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, JJ. Thank you for your description about the day, December 3rd. I was there too. So it was an amazing experience for me. But I really respect your courage and determination to protect the democracy. Thank you very much. Could you please applaud again? Okay, I am very encouraged by all three Korean speakers talking about the nuclear free zone. We have a perfect guest again from Southeast Asia. Could you please give us your idea about Southeast Asia experience?
Yeah.
Muhadi, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here in the middle of individual, like-minded individual who has the vision of a world without nuclear weapons, and we are expecting that this should be realized. But looking at the reality in this region, it's quite frightening. The threat of nuclear weapons in East Asia is very alarming. Not only North Korea is building up its nuclear capabilities, but also China is aiming to build more warheads. Even the data said that China is building 1,000 warhead by 2030.
You have a slide?
Yes. Can you show the slide?
Sorry, cannot provide the slideshow right now. Sorry.
No, okay, don't
Technical
worry.
problems.
Yeah. So this is the reality. China, North Korea has nuclear weapons. But it is not only China and North Korea. The drive for nuclearization is also taking place in South Korea and Japan. Both in South Korea, for example, as the previous speaker mentioned, the majority of the people are responding positively with the initiative to have nuclear weapons, to develop nuclear weapons, while Japan, thankfully, to the civil society, but the government is very reluctant not to rely on nuclear weapons. And South Korea and Japan are still depending on the US nuclear umbrella. So the situation is really very alarming in the East Asia with regard to nuclear weapons. Now, how we deal with this? Alexander Kleiman mentioned two different arguments. One argument is that, yes, we need to get rid of nuclear weapons. That means that the disarmament, nuclear disarmament is very important. And the second argument is people say that, no, we cannot reduce the nuclear weapons unless we provide a positive environment, make the a situation very conducive for nuclear disarmament. So it's like a chicken and egg. Which one we need to start with, to begin with? And from the presentation by Daryl and Professor Moon, we have a very good recommendation that mutual restraint by Daryl is very important, and Professor Moon's dialogue, preventive diplomacy. So I will not say that the two arguments should be separated or contradicted very strongly. We need to pursue both directions. Okay, on the one hand, we need to promote nuclear disarmament, but no less important is to change the hostile relations within the region in order to promote nuclear disarmament. And it is hopefully my contribution here to bring the experience of Southeast Asia. We are very happy that nuclear weapon threat is not there. We have nuclear weapon-free zones, but this cannot be taken for granted, because in 1960s, Southeast Asia was a region of conflict, and Indonesia and Malaysia were at war at that time, and even President Sukarno at that time has an ambition to develop nuclear weapons. Yeah, but I don't know whether this is already earlier. Yeah, okay. So this is what happened here. The enmity relation in the area is very alarming as well, because look at this, the nationalist rhetoric is very dominant and can be used by political leaders to gain support, even for the issue unrelated to the nuclear power, because of they want to maintain the power. So it is this issue that we need to get rid of in order to facilitate and to promote nuclear disarmament. And Southeast Asia has a lesson that can be learned. As I mentioned before, the conflictual relations among Southeast Asian countries was very serious in the 1960s, until finally the leaders at that time say that enough with that. And then the relationship changed from enmity into amity. And then it has been reflected by the establishment of ASEAN, and then the adoption of Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, and finally also the adoption of Southeast Asia Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone. So it is something that is worth to try in the East Asia. Borrowing from Daryl's presentation, it is about mutual restraint. The mutual restraint that we have done in Southeast Asia, changing the conflictual relation between Indonesia and Malaysia, Indonesia and other Southeast Asian countries into more cooperation. And then the second one is dialogue is very important. And in Southeast Asia, actually, there are many fora that can be used in not only regarding to the East Asia, but also Asian-wide. For example, ASEAN has ASEAN Regional Forum, and then East Asia Summit, and so on, and it can be used as a means for that. So, of course, in supporting the idea that we need to build a context, a positive context to promote nuclear disarmament in Asia, then the question that this is something that I would like to ask to Daryl and Professor Moon is, all this initiative need leadership. Who should have this initiative? Because I'm afraid that the political leaders still consider that if we start with the initiative to restrain, then we will be seen as very weak, as appeasing to the enemy. And this is also very dangerous. So that is the question that I would like to ask. And with that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you. Thank you
very much, Muhadi. There are a couple of key questions to Daryl and Professor Moon. Could you answer briefly first?
Well, thank you for the additional insights and comments on the Korean Peninsula and beyond. I think, Muhadi, you bring up a key issue that we struggle with in every country. Is dialogue with adversaries a concession, or is it a key tool in a nation's national foreign policy strategy? I think it's the latter. I mean, if you look at the US-Soviet relationship during the Cold War, these two countries had deep, deep differences for years and years. Nevertheless, the leaders of both sides recognized eventually that they had a mutual interest in dialogue on the threat, nuclear weapons that could lead to the destruction of each country. So arms control and then disarmament between the US and Russia became a critical tool in enhancing the mutual interests of both countries. So, I mean, we need to, as activists, as experts, as politicians, we need to drive that point home in every situation, whether it's the Korean Peninsula, here in Japan, vis-a-vis other countries in the region, in the United States. That's very important. When Donald Trump speaks of peace through strength, we need to be talking about how dialogue with our adversaries requires strength, and we need to be tough in those negotiations. You also asked the question, where does the leadership come from? And I think coming from Washington in the last few days, that is an even more critical question than ever has been. I mean, as we all know, for better or worse, the United States has played a leading role in the management and the problems relating to the nuclear weapons age. And Tokyo and other capitals that are allies of the United States have looked to Washington for leadership. And we're in a period where the leadership from Washington that allies have been used to may not be there, or at least it's hard to predict. So these trends were underway even before Donald Trump's first term in office, beginning in 2017. And so what that reminds me of is the importance of, in a multipolar world, the importance of additional states, leaders in those states, civil society in those states, looking to themselves as the leaders and working together as leaders to solve these problems. So, that's especially true of the TPNW. This was an example of how a relatively small number of states decided that it was time to change the conversation about nuclear weapons, to take ownership of the dialogue rather than allowing the nuclear weapon states to dictate the dialogue. And they did with the negotiation of the treaty. And as we've heard from our previous speakers, it's beginning to change the conversation about nuclear weapons in important ways. So similarly, when it comes to the crisis we're in with respect to possible buildup of nuclear arsenals between the US and Russia, a three-way arms race involving China, it's important for non-nuclear weapon states to speak up, to speak directly to their allies, to remind them of their responsibilities under Article 6 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty to engage in good faith negotiations to end the arms race. So the leadership needs to come from the non-nuclear world, the non-aligned states, more so today than in the previous 80 years of the nuclear age.
Thank you. Professor Moon?
I'm in line with, Daryl's, observation too. As for Professor SUGIONO's, the question, who should take initiative? I think there is only one person who can take initiative, that's Donald Trump, because North Korea is not talking with South Korea. North Korea is not talking with China. North Korea is only talking with Putin, okay? Putin, he has no place for in this kind of negotiation. Therefore, the only person who can really initiate, overall talks for the tension reduction, confidence building, as well as overall, nuclear management, that is, Donald Trump. Because look, what North Korea want the immediate suspension of ROK US joint military exercise and training, non-deployment of strategic weapons to, South Korea, and also it wanted, sanction relaxation, diplomatic normalization. Who can deliver? If we follow the whole Biden approach of bottom up, nobody can do that. The only, Trump can do it from the top-down approach. North Korea same. Who can dare to talk about the reducing size of a nuclear arsenal, okay, and going through the verifiable dismantling of nuclear weapons, no matter how incremental it may be. Therefore, at present moment is, President Trump can take initiative. I don't know whether Kim Jong-un will respond to it positively or not. I'm somewhat skeptical. However, if Trump takes an initiative, okay, and then North Korea might respond. But problem is this: the American approach might be so-called nuclear arms control or reduction talks, which Japan and South Korea oppose. Then that poses one fundamental dilemma to civil society groups in Japan and South Korea. What should we do? But my basic position is we got to, take a more pragmatic approach here. We cannot recognize or endorse North Korean status as a nuclear weapon state. However, we should be aware of the fact that the North Korea has nuclear weapons. With that assumption, we should pursue more in a pragmatic approach. In doing that, Trump approach may be more appealing. Then that being the case, then we should be persuading, civil society groups should be persuading Japanese leadership and South Korean leadership that we should go along with Trump. Then that whole issue is how can But it's very likely that Trump will come out and try to talk with Kim Jong-un, and they may work out something. But that being the case, we should be supporting that initiative. And another point is, as Youngah pointed out, whole issue of denuclearization or nuclear arms talk, nuclear reduction talks should be linked to the ending of war on the Korean Peninsula and the transformation of armistice agreement into a viable peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. Therefore, civil society should continue to send a message to American leadership that the whole nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula should be linked to ending the war and transforming armistice agreement into some sort of peace regime.
Thank you very much. It sounds like the leadership, we cannot rely on the great power leaders. That's for some to be clear, unfortunately. But then the leadership come from either non-nuclear weapon states or civil society, or within the non-nuclear weapon states. Possibly Japan and South Korea could take a leadership in this region. That's like a very good hint for this session. I'd like to ask both Korean ladies. You are representing the civil society at the parliament. Do you see any leadership taking a position in the Korean political situation right now? Who takes the leadership?
네, 거기에 대한 답보다는 최근에 한국에 있었던 한 가지 해프닝을 하나 얘기하려 합니다.
そこについてお答えするよりは、まず最近韓国で行われたハプニングについてご説明いたします。
Before explaining that, I'd like to explain what happened in South Korea.
노벨 평화상을 올해 노벨 평화상을 받기 위해서는 바로 며칠 전에 신청이 마감이 됩니다. 도널드 트럼프를 노벨 평화상 후보자로 추천을 했다고 합니다.
네,先日国会議員の一人が
So recently, a parliament member, as a Nobel Prize winner,
に挙げました。その申請の締め切りはもうすぐ終わりますけれども、
talked about registering
ドナルド・トランプ大統領でした。
and nominating Donald
트럼프가
Trump.
무슨 일을 했죠?
Donald Trump, a Nobel Prize winner?
大統領は何をしましたか?
What has he done?
아마 그분은 도널드 트럼프가 리더십을 발휘해 주기를 바라는 마음에서 한 액션인 것 같았습니다.
多分彼はドナルド・トランプ大統領に対してリーダーシップを発揮してもらいたいという趣旨から発言したというふうに思います。
He talked about this nomination because he wanted to talk about Donald Trump taking the lead. However, the political landscape in the United States, in South Korea, excuse me, is highly divided.
이제 그런 리더십을 발휘해야 될 사람들을 때로는 설득하고, 때로는 협박하고, 때로는 칭찬하면서 리드하는 일이 제가 있는 국회에서 정치인들이 해야 되는 일이 아닐까 생각합니다.
ですが、どのような主体であれ、リーダーシップを発
But
揮して
whatever the
いる
leadership,
人に対しては、ある時には脅迫したり、ある時には働きかけたりなどしながら、
sometimes
そ
we
れをリ
need
ー
to
ドする
disagree
の
with
が
those
私た
leaders.
ち国会議員だと思います。
Actually, everything is not easy. Actually, ending the Korean War is so obvious issues, but nowadays the ending the Korean War is political issues. The when the Moon administration was focusing on the ending the Korean War, declaration of ending the war. But the time the conservative party, they made on political issues. But after that, the Democratic Party, they did not mention about ending the war. So it is a very yeah. So now that even National Assembly, they didn't pass the resolution about the peace on the Korean Peninsula. Yeah, so it is not easy, but even if Yoon Suk-yeol is impeached, the government will be changed. It is a very skeptical about who will be able to lead the nuclear disarmament and the denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula and Northeast Asia. But anyway, the civil society side, we are advocating the necessary of the ending the war and the denuclearization. This is including the eliminating of nuclear umbrella from the U.S.
Very much. Both are very encouraging. Yes, well, please.
네, 제가 그 아무것도 하지 않았던 그 정부가 있는 민주당 의원입니다.
私はその何もしなかったその政党、民主党所属です。
I'm actually part of the political party that did not contribute to the end of the war.
미국 하원에서 우리 종전선언, 이제 한반도의 종전선언을 위한 결의안이 제안이 되었고, 결의안으로 통과된 건 아니지만 국방수권법이라는 법에 attached 돼가지고 이제 그 내용이 만장일치로 통과되긴 했습니다.
That being said, there have been American politicians that have had talks of ending the war.
네, 거기에는 대한민국의 이제 여성 운동 단체들 그리고 또 평화 운동 단체들뿐만 아니라 저희 국회의원들도 함께 동참을 했습니다. 한반도의 주체가 우리 대한민국, 그러니까 사우트 코리아인 것 같지만 정작 또 종전선언의 주체가 아니었기 때문에 외교적 노력을 통해서 또 하기도 했습니다. 다양한 방법을 고민하겠습니다.
そこには韓国の女性運動団体だけではなく、私たち国会議員も参加しまし
And
た。
in that group, this not only included politicians, but women and civil societies.
の主体ではありませんので、私たちは外交ルートなどさまざまな方法を通じて努力しました。
While we may not directly be able to end the war, we can appeal to the international society through working together.
受賞者の候補を推薦したいということだけはやっていなかったということを訴えたいと思います。
But let me just make it clear that we never nominated anyone for the Nobel Peace Prize.
Thank you very much. Hopefully you will win Nobel Peace Prize eventually. Okay, I have also a question to Professor Muhadi. I am very impressed that you described the process. You changed from enmity to amity. What was the process? Who took the leadership and what was the role of civil society and so on? Could you give us hint for Northeast Asia?
In the case of Indonesia, Southeast Asia, the change from enmity into amity took place with the change of the government in Indonesia at the time. Sukarno was replaced by Suharto, and Suharto was more pragmatic at the time, stopped the war, and then we built a relation with Malaysia and so on and so on. So during that time, Suharto played a leadership to change the enmity into enmity. And there must be someone who take this leadership. And so the problem is whether we can rely on the South Korea president or Japanese prime minister. I'm not very, very sure, given the fact that both the president in South Korea as well as the prime minister in Japan are thinking still in the mindset of the deterrence. So we cannot hope very much. So with regard to the situation, I find that we need to take this as a very urgent need to promote this kind of reconciliation, this kind of peace measure, because so far, thankful to the hibakusha, make Japanese is more restraining in exposing the willingness to, for example, station nuclear weapon from the US in Japanese soil. But in the case of South Korea, for example, where the majority of the people are supporting nuclear weapons. So imagine in the next 10 years, for example, when all hibakusha are no longer there, then the young generation do not have any connection with the misery of the atomic bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Then probably the situation will change. Before this happens, we need to take immediate action that something need to be done.
Thank you very much. This is a very encouraging hint for us. Hope we have a very strong leadership from both political leaders and also from civil society, probably eventually. Okay, so we have still 20 minutes. I will give you some short exercise. I'll give you a couple of minutes, for 2 or 3 minutes, to think about the 10 years from now until 2035. What is your best scenario? Not the worst one. Okay? What is your best scenario in this region? I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about it. And then each one of you can give us a couple of minutes presentation. Okay? Meanwhile, I'm not taking any questions from you, but if you think about also by yourself, what is your best scenario the next 10 years? And see how your views are different or same from these experts. Please think about for a couple of minutes. Okay?
We should start.
You can start now?
Sure.
Oh, good. Very good.
So this is it's an excellent question because we need to envision where we want to go and how we get there beginning now. So as I was describing, the situation today is very difficult, no doubt. And we're at a crossroads. Does the world build up? Do we see a buildup of the number of nuclear weapons? Do we see a return to nuclear testing? Do we see nuclear weapons being threatened or used? So one measure of success is in the next decade, we don't see any of those things. And that requires very hard work on the part of civil society, our political leaders in parliaments, in Congress, and yes, presidents and prime ministers. So moving through the next decade without a buildup of US and Russian forces, without a buildup of US, Russian, and Chinese forces, dialogue on the Korean Peninsula resuming, and modest progress towards denuclearization, and modest progress towards achieving a lasting peace on the peninsula. We also need to see a new form of dialogue between other nuclear armed states and the non-nuclear weapon states. We have states outside of the NPT regime, India, Pakistan, Israel, who are not part of the disarmament dialogue, standing aside. How do we engage them? So that's why we put forward this idea about nuclear disarmament summits. We need something new to engage those states and to put pressure on, yes, the Donald Trumps, the Vladimir Putins, the Xi Jinpings, and others to take action to meet their responsibilities. They won't do it alone. Decisions about nuclear weapons, because these are the ultimate instruments of destruction and national power are made by presidents and prime ministers, but presidents and prime ministers need to be and can be influenced by what we say and do, and by common sense, which is our common human survival. So that's what I would see as progress over the next difficult decade.
Thank you. Who goes next? Professor Moon?
Yes, I would come up with this, the most desirable scenario and what is the most feasible scenario. The most desirable scenario, in line with Daryl's observation, we can think about peaceful coexistence between the North and the South in the form of European Union type of integration of two countries that assume that fundamental change in North Korean political system too. And then that being the case, then we can talk about so-called nuclear weapons free zone in Northeast Asia between P3 and non-P3, non-3, Therefore, China, US, Russia on the one hand, North South Korea and Japan on the other hand. And at the same time, and there could be, progress in nuclear reduction talks, okay, and plus a strategic stability among those three P3 countries. That is the most desirable development. I hope so, but in reality, that is very unlikely. I would say that there will be continuation of status quo in negative direction. Therefore, nuclear arms race will be intensifying, tension will be there, but the current architecture of status quo will continue. Okay, but I really don't think that there will be any major outbreak of major wars in Northeast Asia, because its consequences will be so devastating, and I think all the actors, all the parties concerned, will try to avoid it. And that is the feature of Northeast Asia I see.
Thank you very much. Who next?
Actually, nuclear issues is too difficult to discuss in South Korean civil society, South Korean society. So I think the best way we can imagine after 10 years, Korean War will be ended and make a peace treaty. Of course, it is not easy, and many people are skepticism. It can be solved when we cannot solve for last 70 years, but we should overcome this negative situation and spread the message of ending the Korean War. And the other one is the improvement of relationship between DPRK US and DPRK Japan. Of course, the inter-Korean relations. Denuclearization is impossible unless we end the unstable ceasefire system and the long-lasting hostile relations among the countries involved in Korean War, and shift to normalization the relations and create a situation where we no longer have to prepare for war against each other.
Thank you very much. Very good.
Well, there are always two possibilities in the next 10 years. If everything remains the same as today, then the situation will not change, but there is a possibility of getting worse. But I can also see light in the tunnel, that we can still have hope. First, because South Korea and Japan are democratic countries, where the citizen has the right to choose the government. Please make use of your right to choose the right government, who has the vision of the world without nuclear weapons. If that can be used, then the future is very, very bright. And for that, also, it is important that the people with the support of the civil society need to engage more actively, not only within its country, but also in building relations with the neighboring country, which currently is in the hostile relations to one another. So with that efforts, of course, it is not easy, as you mentioned, but it pays in the future. Thank you. Thank you very much.
네, 저는 발표에서 한반도 평화 프로세스를 이야기했는데요. 너무 그 사우스 코리아 중심으로 이야기한 게 아닌가라고 생각하지만 실제 이 영내에서의 가장 긴장감이 높은 곳이 해결되어야 이 문제가 함께 해결될 수 있다고 생각합니다. 그래서 우리 이영하 선생님께서 이야기한 몇 가지 것들처럼 한반도 문제에 있어서 가장 우려하는 지금 트럼프와 노스코리아 김정은이 대화를 하는 동안 한반도가 패싱당하는 것이 아니라 한반도가 함께 인발브되어서 그 이야기 안에서 한반도 평화 프로세스 버전 2가 진행되는 것, 제가 이야기했던 것이 아주 이상적으로 느껴질지 모르겠지만 그 부분이 어떻게 보면 가장 먼저 할 수 있는 첫 번째 스텝인 것 같습니다.
私は発表で韓半島平和プロセスについてお話ししました。もし私
So I
が
talked about the
韓国
peace
中心
process.
的な話ばっかりしたのではないかと思われるかもしれません。
So you might have thought that I talked a lot about just the Korean peace process.
が解決されてこそこの問題
But
が解
by
決されると思います。
resolving the places where there's the most tension,
韓半島問
it
題
will
について私たちが一
lead
番
to
トラン
lasting
プ大統
efforts.
領と金正恩委員長の間で会話が行われ、
So
その中で
between
韓国の頭越しでそのようなことが行われてはならないというふうに思いますので、
so between
韓
the,
国
Kim
の形で
Jong
韓半島平和プロセスを実現すべきだというふうに思います。
that having the dialogue between the two leaders will have the process succeed.
Ideas, vision, which I think it's important because I am inspired by the morning first session. We have to imagine the world without nuclear weapons, and then we have to create. The first thing is to imagine that kind of vision, and that we have to then create. We have to make action. So I think this is a very good exercise. Okay, so final minutes. I think I will give you a final word for each one of you, 2 minutes again, to talk about your final conclusion of this session. In particular, there are a couple of people already mentioned about nuclear free zone, but also I'd like to discuss the particularly Daryl, US, Russia, China relationship. Okay, so give us your final idea, thoughts, conclusions of this session for 2 minutes each. Who comes first? Maybe. Thank you very much. Either way, fine.
I think this time it is urgent to make an environment for dialogues. But the situation is too bad. But anyway, even the Moon administration is leading to peace process on the Korean Peninsula. But we felt the build the trust. Because at that time the government did not take appropriate measures. Moon government increased the military defense, introduced the strategic weapons from U.S. and resumed the ROK and U.S. joint military drills. So I mentioned nowadays the South Korean civil society is focusing on the making environment for dialogue. It is a very urgent issue. So I think it is an important the ROK and US take preemptive measures like suspension of joint military drills. This exercise this military exercise is representative of a hostile policies toward the DPRK. These exercises include the operation to take over DPRK and remove the leadership in the event of emergency situation. So it could be if we decide to suspend the joint military exercise, it could change the atmosphere. So South Korean civil society will try to make this kind of conditions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay. Transforming enmity into amity is very important in reducing the tension and at the end also eliminating nuclear weapons in East Asia. But in doing that, the initiative and the leadership should come from inside, from within the region itself. It is not possible to rely on the outside power. If I can bring the experience of Southeast Asia, for example, it was the decision by the Southeast Asian countries to get rid of the influence of both Soviet Union and the US during the height of the Cold War, make it possible for Southeast Asia to talk about ourselves from within. So this is also the case, and Southeast Asia is not the exception. In Europe, for example, the decision by France and Germany to change the relationship from hostility into cooperation is played a very important role in bringing Western Europe together. So this is also, I think, should also be working here in East Asia. So instead of relying on, say, outside power like the US, then there should be initiative and leadership from within, either by Japan, South Korea, China, or even North Korea to reduce the tension. Thank you very much. Thank you.
현실 정치인이다 보니까 마이크를 쉽게 잡을 수가 없었습니다. 말을 쉽게 할 수가 없었네요.
実は私は政治家ですの
So
で、
actually, I'm a
これ
politician.
自体が簡単なものではありませんでした。
So to
그런데 방금 말씀하신 것처럼 정말 중요한 건 우리 내부의 힘이라는 생각이 드는 게 남한 사회, 사우스 코리아 안에서 이런 목소리를 이어내는 것조차도 아직 완성되지 않았다는 점, 그리고 또 가까운
so coming here wasn't easy.
일본과 대한민국이 함께 이 문제를 공감하는 이런 목소리가 더 넓어지기 위해서 노력해야 되는 점 등을 지금은 사실 주목하고 있습니다.
しかし、おっしゃった通りに、
However,
最も重要なことは
as
私
everyone
た
has
ち内部
mentioned,
の力だと思います。
I think it's the powers from within that is
声を出すことが
important.
容易なことではありません。また、
And it's
近い
not an
日本
easy
と
task.
韓国が一緒にこの問題について共感し、声を出すように、
So
その声をま
to
た広げるよう
for
に一緒に取り
Japan
組んでいきた
and
いと思い
Korea
ます
to be on the
그래서
same front on this
저희가
issue,
일본 의원과
we should
함께하고
come
있는
together.
Participatory 이니셔티브도 결국은 한일이 먼저 출발을 했고 그 가운데 미국과 미국이 지금 같이 또 커뮤니케이션을 하고 있지만 중국 역시도 어떻게 보면 러시아하고 지금 선을 긋고 있는 상황에서 국제사회에서 충분히 룸을 열어줄 수 있는 또 가능성이 있다고 생각합니다. 우리 영 내에 있는 이 지역 내에 있는 인접 국가들 간의 그런 추진력을 먼저 만들어 보려고 합니다.
まずは日本の議員とともに
So
P3
first,
プラス3 イニシ
we
アティ
should
ブ
go
を
on the
立ち上げ
P3
た
process.
そのような状況でございますが、
So this is
現
the
状としては
situation
アメ
now.
リカも参加のためにその話し合い
So,
をしていま
but
す。
America
また
hasn't
中国も
participated, and
現在としてはロシアと一線を画すよう
China
な
and
状況
Russia
の
are
ように見えますの
cooperating
で、
with each
ま
other.
ずは地域内の隣国同士で推進
So
活動を
the
進めるべき
neighboring
だというふうに
countries
思います。
together, I think, should have a better
Thank you very
cooperation
much.
together.
you know, the
Yes, Professor Wu.
Madam Jaejung she's chairperson of PNND Korea chapter, the parliamentarians for nuclear non-proliferation and nuclear disarmament. And she has been very active for these kind of causes. Therefore, and also Youngah has been leader in the civil society on the nuclear non-proliferation and peace movement. Therefore, there is a really wonderful combination. Therefore, what I wanted to see is this, stronger cooperation between Japan and South Korea, between not only civil society, but also parliament. Okay, and they should form a new solidarity organization so that they can work on the, not only influencing policymakers, but also sharing information, educating people on the danger of nuclear weaponization and all these kinds of things. Therefore, I would strongly wanted to emphasize the importance of civil society and political society called the parliament in advancing this idea. In that way, we can turn imagination into creation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Final word for Daryl.
Well, this has been a fascinating session and a great conference. Let me just say a few words about the challenges that lie ahead with respect to the United States, Russia, and China. The person Donald Trump has been mentioned many different times, and he is a critical decision maker. And this is an important year that's coming up. And I think one thing we should all recognize is that the nuclear weapons and deterrence relationships between the nuclear armed states, they're all related. There is a chain of relationships that spans from Asia to the United States, to Europe and to Russia. And progress in many ways depends on what happens in each area, but progress really does depend a lot on the largest nuclear armed states. And so today, it's not just the United States and Russia, it's also China has a role. How we get this conversation going between the United States and China, it will be difficult, it will be long, but it requires understanding each side's concerns. It requires compromise and dialogue, and that needs to resume soon. The dialogue between the United States and Russia will resume relatively soon. As Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin talk about what happens in Ukraine, is there an end to the war in Ukraine? And as part of that conversation, it is very, very likely they will also talk about the future of the unsteady U.S.-Russian relationship after the New START treaty expires. But it's going to take friends of the United States and advisors to President Trump in Japan, in South Korea, in Europe, and yes, to some extent in civil society, to guide President Trump and encourage him to pursue practical options to move forward. One thing I would just remind everybody is that the first term of Donald Trump, he tried to do some spectacular things, and he should be credited with trying to do some of those spectacular things, but some of the things that he tried to do were spectacular failures. And so, it is not certain whether the Trump administration can take on these challenges, and it will take the help and the advice active of leaders here in Japan and elsewhere to move the US and Russia in the right direction. And then just very finally, let me just also say something to the younger people in this audience who are listening to all of this. So these issues are difficult and they may seem overwhelming, but it is important that people like you remain engaged, remain active, question what you're hearing about the value of nuclear weapons, continue to become involved however you can. And I'm especially inspired by the younger generation, in part because of people like Shizuka Karamitsu, who you saw earlier, who's a research analyst at the Arms Control Association, who comes from Hiroshima, who was inspired by the Hibakusha to take a more active role in this issue, and she's trying to do that. And so let her be an inspiration to all of you who are concerned about this, to take further steps to make a difference in this issue, because it's your generation that's going to make a difference to move towards and achieve a world without nuclear weapons. So thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, all of you. And as you described, the situation in Northeast Asia is very, very difficult. And I have been attending many panels on this issue. But today, this panel is one of the most optimistic, positive panels I've ever attended. Thank you very much.
Thanks you. Thank you.
So we have to build on this dialogue today. Tomorrow also we have a session on the recommendations, which hope you can, some of you can join if you're interested in, to discuss specific recommendations from this forum. And again, please join me to thank all the panelists. Thank you very much again. Thank you. I'd like to conclude this session.
Very good job.
Very good.
Very good moderator.
Very much.